Hayao Miyazaki's lamentations are deeply existential. Goro's are personal. Whether or not it is fair that he is inevitably going to be compared to his father, it is a comparison that I think cannot be escaped. And I do read Up on Poppy Hill, Goro Miyazaki's best film, arguably his only good film, in that light. Not necessarily as a personal statement for or against his father, but in the statement of advocating for the future, advocating for a sense of progress, of not being defined by the past and shackled by the past, and welcoming an adventurous and auspicious new tomorrow. That is not necessarily something that can only be read in the context of his relationship with his father, but it does have, I think, an added resonance in that kind of reading. Up on Poppy Hill comes from source material that is much older than the film. And the film takes place in the 1960s. Seemingly an odd time for Goro to make a film about. He was not alive then. And it's not, say, wartime or a time like that where one could be expected to make a period piece. He's looking at a very specific time in Japanese history for its philosophical and moral significance. It's important to understand what the 1960s mean for Japan. They're somewhat similar to America in the 60s, less in the sense of the 60s of the counterculture or the protests, although there was some of that in Japan, certainly, but more in the sense of the 60s as a beacon of progress, of advancement, of this technological utopianism, the Star Trek 60s, the Apollo program 60s. The image of the 60s where everything seemed endless, like a grand green horizon rolling out before the observer. I currently live in Seattle, and that is a city that was very much shaped by that optimistic, hopeful image of the 1960s. The greatest legacy of that being the Space Needle. Still one of the most beautiful buildings in the entire country, if you ask me. And a building that deeply speaks to an idea of the future. Not the future in this mundane, prosaic sense of, oh, where will we be in 10 years? Maybe we will have better phones. Who knows? Maybe technology will be a bit cheaper. Maybe AI's things will improve, and that is questionable in of itself. I don't mean that kind of prosaic thing. I mean the future as an idea, as a notion of leaving behind the shackles of the past, of no longer being bound by old patterns and routines, but creating a new image of what human society and human connection can be. One that does not have to refer back to tradition, but is powered by scientific progress and a sense of optimism and a sense of exploration and adventure, of going out and seeking new experiences and evaluating those experiences empirically based on pre-existing notions with an open and broad mind, looking into what one can learn and how one can reevaluate and rethink pre-established notions that seem so firm and absolute. They can be revised based on reason, based on the possibilities flowing through the human mind, in response to imagination and in response to unprecedented experiences. That is the kind of future that produced the Space Needle. That is the kind of future I still feel when I look at that building. It's this deep, quasi-utopian aspiration for a better world. Clean, elegant, harmonious, working for the prosperity of all. A sense of refinement and sophistication founded on the aspiration for a better world. A world that fits the needs of people while also being fueled by their imaginations and their creativity. That is very much the image of the 60s that Goro Miyazaki is tapping into in Up on Poppy Hill. But that has an extra resonance for Japan because of the fact that Japan at that time was only finally emerging from the long shadow of World War II. There are notes about the war in this film. It does linger to an extent. But there is this underlying optimism that those old sorrows can be moved past. That the aspirations and imaginations of young, passionate individuals can create something better, something not tied to a past that is associated with sorrows and lamentations. Japan in the 1960s is the Japan of the Shinkansen, which was utterly revolutionary when it came out, at a time when other countries were making the short-sighted decisions to invest only in car infrastructure and highway infrastructure, tearing through the historic hearts of downtowns in the process, especially in America. Japan was investing in its trains, making its trains better, creating these space-age vehicles that move with an unprecedented speed and an unprecedented elegance and gracefulness. Tokyo, for people in pre-modern Japan, was kind of the other side of the world from Kyoto and Osaka. And that was intentional. The shogunate moved the capital to a very far distant area that was mostly just marshland beforehand, so as to create a separation from the old imperial order that had existed beforehand with all its aristocrats and nobility. But now Tokyo and Kyoto, Osaka are connected easily, simply. I rode that bullet train, and that's a product of the 1960s in Japan. Also associated with that, the Olympics. The bullet train was completed in time for the Olympics in 1964, an Olympics that showcased a hopeful beacon of Japan, a fully modern, fully democratic Japan that had risen from the ashes of its defeat as not a country tied to the past, not a country that was shackled by this devotion to military conquest and the emperor, and the desire to enforce these very rigid hierarchies, but an open country defined by science and technology and exploration and the hope of unity and connection between the peoples of the world. This Olympics was fundamentally vital to the collective spirit of the people of Japan in a way I think I have a hard time explaining. The Olympics means a lot of different things for different countries. For, say, the people of Brazil, the Olympics was this enormous boondoggle that left these rusting stadiums. For places like Paris, last year, the Olympics was very ambitious and it was pulled off quite well. And it was a beautiful, exhilarating spectacle and led to some permanent improvements in the Parisian transit infrastructure and moves to make the city more walkable, more bikeable, more vibrant, more eco-friendly, and overall spotlight on a new image of what Paris could be. And wow, that flaming cauldron rising above the skies of Paris in that gorgeous chrome balloon every day of the games looked so mystical. And yet democratic, really bringing the glow of the games to all. But for Paris, no one had to worry about Paris being perceived of as a beautiful, wonderful place. For Japan, Tokyo was considered this bombed-out, gloomy, backward city, and the Olympics was a chance to present an image of the new Japan. This deep, foundational optimism for what the country can be. And the Olympics is even referenced in Up on Poppy Hill. Again, these associations of youth, of energy, of space-age futurism, of a deep optimism and hope for a brighter tomorrow. A cleaner, more efficient, more elegant world that brings prosperity to all the people of a country and eventually to all the people of a world. I do want to emphasize that this is a very different vision from that of Hayao Miyazaki. By the end of Up on Poppy Hill, everything is okay. There is a bit of sweet sentimentality in the ending in a way that Hayao Miyazaki avoids quite often. There is a sense by the end that, oh, everything is going to be alright here. Don't worry, no incest, nothing weird like that. No blockage. The Latin Quarter is saved. There's this deep hopefulness that, yes, the past does not have to define the future, and the newer generation can create its own legacy. I think it's pretty obvious as to why this particular time in history appealed to Goro, even though he did not live it. Miyazaki's Senior's films are much more contemplative, much more wistful, much less willing to provide this kind of unmitigated happy ending, this kind of perfect resolution that one gets in Up on Poppy Hill. And that befits Hayao's work because Miyazaki Sr. is deeply ambivalent about the state of the world. He views modern society not in this aspirational way as his son, but rather as something hollow and vacuous, something that has severed people's connections with the natural environment, severed people's connections with their communities, severed people's connections with the ceremonies and folklore of particular places, particular environments. Think of Princess Mononoke, perhaps, as the best example for a very bittersweet ending, hauntingly so, where the loss of this pre-modern unity and harmony is inevitable, and it needs to be accepted instead of simply being ignored or thought of as something that can be reversed, which is the mistake of many of the forest gods in the film, and is fundamentally against the will of the supreme spirit of the forest, who is much more ambivalent, much more contemplative. But nonetheless, though the future must be faced, and these difficult challenges of trying to balance between tradition and modernity, between humanity and nature, between these different factions with these different belief systems, is hard. it's nonetheless important, and it must be confronted. There's a sorrow to that, but it's part of life. That's a typical Ghibli ending, though I find the ending of Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke to be particularly affecting, even by his standards. Up on Poppy Hill is a bit more conventional, a bit more ebullient. And to a certain extent, it's a bit of a wish fulfillment for Goro. And I don't say that as a negative, necessarily. I think this is one of his few films that reflects a distinct artistic vision and ethos, as opposed to Tales from Earthsea, which somehow makes a Ghibli Ursula Le Guin combination bad, which there is no way that film should be as bad as it is, sadly. And then you have something like Earwig that came afterward that demonstrates the lamentable underside of Goro's optimism for technology, which seems genuine on his part. It creates things that are soulless and a bit sterile. Think of Max Weber's quote of specialists without spirit, sensualists without heart, that nonetheless believe in a disenchanted society that they've achieved a level of sophistication that has never before been seen. It's this atomized hollowness that reduces everything to numbers and technologies and measurable quantities that Hayao Miyazaki fundamentally was opposed to. He knew the underside of that. Nonetheless, there is a real space for kind of hopeful optimism for the future when it's done well and it's done sincerely, and I think Up on Poppy Hill delivers that in a thoughtful way. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. You want to see more videos like this. For anyone else, thank you all again. Adios, comrades.